Well, good afternoon or good morning, everyone. I'm Jen Farmer. I'm the Executive Director of the Friedreich's Ataxia Research Alliance, and thank you all for joining us today for this webinar about an upcoming meeting, the Friedreich's Ataxia Patient-Focused Drug Development Meeting, which will be June 2nd. I'd like to first recognize that this meeting has come about not only because of work that FARA has been doing, but it's work that FARA has been doing in collaboration with our partners at the Muscular Dystrophy Association and the National Ataxia Foundation and the CureFA Foundation. All of us have been working together to make this meeting possible. Just so you all know, I have muted all the lines because we can have up to 100 people in the webinar at any one time. So I ask that you just keep those lines muted until the end. We are recording this webinar, and if you do have comments or questions, you can submit them through a chat option. You'll see, I think it's at the top of your screen, there's an option for you to enter a chat box. And from that chat box, you can submit questions. And so once I get through the presentation, I'm happy to open it up to questions and discussion. So just a little bit of background. The purpose of the meeting is, to really educate the Food and Drug Administration on what FA is like, the symptoms, how the disease progresses, what people currently do to manage Friedreich's ataxia, and then what would be considered meaningful treatments and what some of the prior experiences have been with clinical trials. And all of this is really the overall purpose to give the FDA a more detailed and better understanding of the disease so that they're in a better position to make risk-benefit decisions at key points in the drug development process. So, one thing we want to make sure you understand is this is really your opportunity. This is your meeting. FARA is, and MDA and NAF are only facilitating the platform for this meeting, but this is really your meeting to have your voices heard, your perspectives shared. FDA has an important role in approving all new drug treatments for any disease, not just FA. And so it's important that they hear from you directly so that in the future, when they're making decisions about new treatments, it's from the most informed perspective. So why now? I'm going to go through a little bit of an overview about drug development and about FDA's role in drug development, but in the past, there's only been the opportunity for the patient voice to be heard at the very end of the drug development process, really at the point of whether or not a drug was being approved. And what I think both the pharmaceutical industry as well as the FDA has learned is that understanding the patient perspective and understanding the disease from the patient perspective is important for drug development. It leads to the development of better drugs to treat specific diseases, and also, again, gives a better perspective of what symptoms need to be treated, what's important to patients, and again, risk-benefit. And so there's been efforts at a legislative level to allow for the patient voice to be heard earlier in the drug development process. And that's what this meeting really helps to facilitate, is to make sure that the patient perspective is included early in both drug development process and in the FDA deliberations as well. And so with some recent legislation that's been passed, FDA has actually been able to host these patient-focused drug development meetings. And this has been part of the past 5 years, a process of putting together these kinds of meetings for a small group of diseases and then slowly expanding outward. And so FDA has done some of these meetings, and it's been figured out kind of what kinds of topics need to be covered for them to gain the perspective that they need. So some of these meetings have already occurred, but not a whole lot. And so we're still really at the beginning of this patient engagement process. So just some important logistics up front. Who should participate? Individuals with FA as well as caregivers. We've opened the meeting to drug development partners because we believe that it's important for them to understand the patient perspective of the disease just as it's important for FDA. So in the audience it'll be individuals with FA, caregivers, drug development partners, folks from FDA. We've personally invited over 30 people from FDA, and we're getting really positive responses. We've had no one decline participation. And then there will also be, I think, some of our, researchers and clinicians from the FA community who will also be there. The meeting's June 2nd from 8 to 12:30. It is at the Marriott Hotel and Conference Center in Hyattsville, Maryland, and that's just outside of Washington, D.C., close to FDA headquarters. And you can participate by being there either in person or online. We will have the whole entire meeting broadcast by webcast on YouTube, and so you'll be able, if you're not able to be there in person and you're logging into the live webcast, you'll not only be able to see and hear all of the proceedings, but you'll also be able to add written comments in through the webcast. Because we've got a big group of folks from the FA community all assembled on that day, after 12:30, when the official patient-focused drug development meeting ends, we have set up sort of a brief research update for the afternoon. So some of our researchers and drug development companies will, give updates on a few specific programs from 1:30 to 3 p.m. So I just wanted to back up and just make sure everybody really understands the drug development process and what FDA's role is in the drug development process and what it is not, or what is not, considered FDA's role. And then, again, come back to this specific meeting and go through the details of what will be covered and participation, and then any other information that you'll need that'll help facilitate participation. So related to FDA and drug development, there's sort of this picture here shows sort of the research process, or what we call drug development process, that starts here at the light blue box with basic research and drug discovery and goes all the way through human clinical trials to the point of a drug being approved and, available by a doctor writing a prescription and you going to the pharmacy to pick it up. So, this is just gives you an idea of different stages of drug development. Then up top here in these green boxes, I'm indicating two places where the FDA is directly involved in making a decision. And making a decision for a drug first to move from the research phase, from the lab, into human clinical trials, and that's this phase right here, IND approval, investigational new drug. That's what IND stands for. And then at the end, the FDA is responsible for actually approving a drug as a treatment for a specific disease. And that's an NDA approval or new drug application approval. Down here on the bottom in the yellow boxes, I've indicated times in this drug development process where researchers or pharmaceutical companies or advocacy groups will together be able to interact with FDA to have discussions with them about a specific drug or drug development program to gain feedback and experience and insights from FDA so that hopefully you're setting yourself up for success when you submit for your IND or your NDA because you've kind of talked with FDA ahead of time and introduced your program to them and learned from them what their questions and concerns are going to be for throughout the process. So even though FDA is specifically responsible at these approval stages, there's also opportunities along the way to engage and discuss with them specific programs. And again, traditionally, the only time when patient testimony or patient voice was specifically included in this process was at the very end during this new drug application review process. And what we're trying to now do through these patient-focused drug development meetings is enable a mechanism where the patient voice is actually included and understood throughout the process and not just at the end. So drug discovery is really the very beginning. That's where the basic science starts, understanding the disease, what organ systems it affects, and then thinking about what drug targets or therapeutic strategies could be used to address that specific disease. And there's lots of different ways to do that, but you're identifying specific targets. So in the case of Friedreich's ataxia, one target might be the FA protein frataxin that's deficient, and trying to find mechanisms or drugs that can increase frataxin protein as one example. And this drug discovery process, takes a long time. Literally, you're testing thousands and thousands, sometimes millions of compounds to be able to find one that you're going to identify and take forward into this drug development process. So if you, once you sort of have that candidate drug or compound that you think might be beneficial in targeting a specific aspect of a disease, you start in this process called preclinical development. Again, this is still in the laboratory. You're still looking sometimes at cells in a dish or doing testing in animals. But you're also starting to really think about, okay, how am I going to actually make this drug? So manufacturing becomes a big piece of preclinical development. And then you're also really looking at safety of the drug and testing the drug in multiple different species of organisms. And there's there's a lot that goes into this preclinical phase of development because this is the step before you go into clinical trials. And when you, at the end of this preclinical development is when you're submitting to FDA to ask for their approval to go into humans. And so there's sort of a lot of boxes that have to be checked along the way and formal tests that FDA requires to demonstrate safety prior to going into humans. The first time a drug goes into human testing, when it's a new drug, typically called a phase 1 study. And phase 1 studies are usually small studies done in healthy volunteers. And the main goal of a phase 1 is to understand, to look at safety and dose and understand how the drug is metabolized in the body. That's sometimes called pharmacokinetics. So how does an organism handle a molecule once it's on board? So once phase 1 studies are completed and we've got some basic understanding of what happens when a human takes this drug for the first time. Then you move into what's called phase 2 studies. And in rare diseases, the numbers of patients required for each of these kinds of studies is variable based on the disease and also based on the particular drug. But again, phase 2, it's still pretty early. You're evaluating safety. You're looking for side effects of the drug. Again, you're looking at these pharmacokinetics. So how does the organism or the human affect the drug? So when the drug's ingested, how's it metabolized? What does the gut do to it? Or how long does it stay in the bloodstream? You're also looking in early phase trials about pharmacodynamics. So how does the drug affect the organism? Does the drug actually hit its specific target? Does it have off-target effects? And you'll also start thinking in early phase studies of how you're going to evaluate whether or not this drug is doing something beneficial. Is it treating a specific symptom? Is it slowing progression of disease? And oftentimes these phase 2 studies are also placebo, tested against a placebo or a control. And then phase 3 studies are typically the largest type of human clinical trial that's done. And, so you're widening the group of people who are exposed to the drug, continuing to evaluate safety. But your real goal towards the end is to show that the drug is having some sort of benefit, that it's treating a symptom, influencing the progression of the disease maybe, and, trying to directly measure the benefit. And again, these phase 3 trials are also placebo-controlled trials. There are some modifications that can be made. Not everybody goes through phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. Sometimes in rare diseases, we're able to combine phase 2 and phase 3 studies. But that's sort of beyond the scope of what we're going to cover today. But this is just to give you sort of the overview of what the process looks like and what's being assessed at specific points and times and sort of the body of evidence that gets built through this drug development process. So once you've demonstrated safety and efficacy, typically able to think about then filing what's called a new drug application. And that new drug application has all of the data that's been collected from preclinical through clinical testing, from animals and humans, all the manufacturing information, and you're putting that application together and putting it in front of FDA and asking them to consider approval of the drug for specific treatment. Once the FDA gets this new drug application, they assign it to a review team, and that review team typically has 6 to 10 months to review the application and make a decision. Again, this can be expedited through specific programs that now exist, but this is just to give you a sense of the time that's involved and the amount of data that's actually there that has to be reviewed. And it's during this review process that the FDA actually assembles an advisory committee, and there is actual patient representation on the advisory committee. And this is what I mentioned earlier about where there's the formal opportunity for the patients to provide input to the FDA on specific program or this specific drug. If the drug's approved, that doesn't mean that the work is done or that this process is totally complete. There is continuing safety that occurs, and often FDA actively maintains programs that look at post-market safety surveillance, because once a drug's approved, it's now available to a much wider population, and it's important to make sure the greater numbers and diversity of individuals exposed to a drug that safety surveillance is ongoing. So just to review, so FDA does not develop the drugs. That's the researchers, the pharmaceutical companies, sometimes groups like FARA will be involved directly in drug development activities, but FDA does not discover drugs or do the development part. FDA does not do the clinical trials. Clinical trials are run by pharmaceutical companies, researchers, physicians. Once a drug is approved, FDA does not have any authority related to regulating how that drug is used in clinical practice. And it does not have any role or authority in regulating the price of the medication. So FDA's mission is really promoting public health and safety and making sure that that's their main goal, is safety and efficacy. And there are review teams that are specific experts who, from medical reviewers to biostatisticians to toxicologists who sit on these teams, manufacturing experts, and can work with companies through this drug development process, but then these review teams, make those key decisions. One second, I think somebody... There's a little bit of background noise, so if everybody can just make sure that their lines are still muted, that'd be great. And again, FDA's authority, while we've been talking about drugs and biologics treatments for diseases, FDA's sort of scope is much broader than that. And it includes foods, medical devices, cosmetics, veterinary products, tobacco products. So, just keep in mind that this, this agency is really responsible for broad public health. And there's a lot that the agency is responsible for. And I would encourage anyone who wants to learn more about the FDA and the work that they do to go to the FDA website. It's very user-friendly. There's a lot of information there. And you can actually view some prior meetings that FDA has had with, for new drug applications and things like that to get a better sense of how all of that works. So I'm going to come back now to the patient-focused drug development meeting and focus on, our specific meeting. And these patient-focused drug development meetings, again, we want to focus on, what is the disease? What are the symptoms? How does it affect people? How does it change over time? And what do people do to manage the disease today so that there's a good understanding of the symptoms that need to be treated, symptoms that are important in the context of treatment, and then to really help the FDA get a good handle on being able to make risk-benefit assessments. And so, these meetings were started by FDA, and they've kind of figured out what is a good way for them to, in a short period of time, gather that patient perspective about the condition. And so these meetings do follow a somewhat prescribed format that's already been vetted and established. We didn't necessarily make all of this up on our own. No, but the key piece that's most important to FDA, again, is that it's the patients who are providing the input at the meeting, not physicians, and not me or other representatives of FARA or MDA or NAF. So the framework for the meeting is, the FDA has come up with these, what they call panels and specific questions to be addressed within each panel. And again, with the goal of them at the end of the day having the information needed for a risk-benefit framework. And again, the emphasis on the direct patient involvement, and success for them is being able to hear from a lot of people within the community in a short period of time. At the end of the meeting, there is a voice of the patient report that gets prepared. And that's a summary of everything that's presented and discussed at the meeting, as well as data that we collect actually during the meeting and through written comments that can be submitted to us either ahead of time or even 30 days after the meeting. And all of that will get assembled into this voice of the patient report, which then does get submitted to FDA. It's also a report that will, live on all of our organization websites, be publicly available for not only the FDA, but other drug development partners or future interested groups. So again, participation June 2nd from 8 to 12:30. And again, you can participate in person or online via webcast. I'm going to go over the agenda of the meeting. So we're going to start the meeting at 8 a.m. on time. We will absolutely have to stick to time because there's a lot crammed into the agenda. So there'll be initial welcome and introductory comments by our organizations and by the FDA. And then there will be a short video that kind of gives everyone a sense of what daily life with FA is like by, where we're actually getting video of a few individuals with FA at different stages of the disease, and we'll be able to show a short 5-minute video that'll kind of set the background. We have a professional moderator that we've been working with in planning the meeting and who will help run the meeting. His name's James Valentine, and I included his photo here because I realized most people won't know him. And he has an important role in an important meeting for us. James is a former FDA employee, and he had actually worked at FDA to help establish these meetings and figure out what format really worked, and develops and understands what the FDA needs and wants to learn from these kinds of meetings. And so he's been critical to helping us prepare the agenda and then prepare for how we're going to actually execute the meeting. And so he will be formally moderating it. After we go through that welcome and the video and James gets everyone settled, the meeting will be divided up into what we call 2 panels, or you can think of it as 2 sessions. And those sessions, each session covers specific topics. And the first session focuses on symptoms of FA, and the second session focuses on how you manage symptoms and what we're thinking about related to treatments. As part of each session, there will be patient testimony, there will be polling questions that we'll be using, and then there will also be time for moderated discussion where we're looking for participation from the audience, patients, caregivers, kind of raising your hand, open mic kind of thing, providing direct comment and feedback. Let's see, it looks like we've got somebody who's off mute, so if folks can just check, make sure that they're still muted, that would be great because we've got some background noise. So we'll do polling questions, moderated discussion for each panel, and then FDA is actually going to provide some closing comments at the end of the meeting. So just to dig in a little deeper, so the first panel is about living with FA, specifically around the symptoms of FA, and what symptoms sort of most impact you, how do they affect daily life, how have these symptoms changed over time, or what do these symptoms or the progression of these symptoms keep you from doing in terms of activities of daily living or things that are important to you? How have you had to adjust your lifestyle for these symptoms? What worries you about the symptoms or the progression of the disease? And, you know, you can imagine one of the polling questions might have, you know, a long list of symptoms, and we'll be asking people to kind of prioritize and say, you know, which symptom's the most important right now to you for us to address related to treatments. And so during the first panel, there will be 5 individuals, 2 caregivers, 3 individuals with FA who will provide brief testimonies about 4 to 5 minutes each, addressing these general questions. Then James will open up this panel or this session to discussion and these polling questions that will again focus on these kinds of questions. The second panel or the second session focuses on how you manage your disease. So what things do you do today to manage symptoms? Do you do physical therapy, exercise, diet? Have you had surgeries? If you have cardiomyopathy or diabetes, what medications do you have to take? Then FDA wants to know how well do these therapies work? And you know, this is really important in terms of not only understanding risk-benefit, but also understanding sort of the unmet medical need related to FA. You know, because we don't have any approved treatments for FA today, we have a lot of unmet medical need. And even understanding non-FA specific things that folks do to manage their disease will help put some of this into context. Then we're going to kind of expand that topic a little bit to discuss, you know, in an ideal world, what does treatment look like for you? What symptoms are most important related to treatment? Could treating specific symptoms be meaningful? You know, if there was a treatment for that only focused on cardiomyopathy or scoliosis, would those things be meaningful? Or how important is slowing progression of disease? And what does that mean to people, slowing progression, you know, of disease? How do people think about that? So these are really difficult questions, and there's no right or wrong answers to these. But you know, sharing experiences and sharing people's thoughts will, I think, just again help inform both FDA and our drug development community around how to make sure that the drugs that are being developed are treating aspects of the disease that are important to patients. And when we have high unmet medical need, you know, what are the most important symptoms to focus on, or you know, types of treatment approaches that are going to be most meaningful to people living with the disease. So coming back, we're going to have 5 people provide testimony during each of the panels. Then after the testimony from those 5 individuals provided, James, the moderator, will open it up to asking specific polling questions. The polling questions will be based on, you know, the topics I just reviewed, and you'll actually be able to answer polling questions whether you're in the room at the conference or if you're online. There's a software that we're using that's going to allow you to answer polling questions by text message through your cell phone. There will also be a web page that you could use if you would like to. We've already tested the polling software with several small focus groups, and it's worked really well. So Even I've been able to figure out the text messaging, and I am not a technological person at all. So it should be quite easy for folks to be able to participate by answering some of the questions directly and helping us capture data. And then during that open session with the polling questions, there's also going to be time for open discussion. And James will put some of these specific questions back out to the rest of the group, and folks in the audience, patients, caregivers, will be able to raise their hand and provide additional perspective and additional response. I think it's important that, we've only got 4.5 hours for this whole meeting, and so we're doing these webinars for everyone to understand the context of the meetings, how they can participate, and to really be prepared ahead of time, having thought about some of these questions and what experiences people want to be able to share. And I'm hoping that we have a really packed house with, several hundred people participating both in the room and online. And so if we've got a lot of people, we want to be able to hear from as many people as possible. And so we do have to ask everyone to keep their comments concise and focused. But, we want to hear from as many people as possible. And again, you'll be able to submit comments after the meeting as well, up to 30 days. So in addition, we're going to have another one of these webinars. It's exactly like the one we've had today. It'll be the same set of slides. I'm going to try and say all of the same things again on April 11th. But just to get everyone prepared for the meeting and know what to expect. But then after the meeting, you can submit comments back to FARA and specifically to my colleague Jane Larkindale. Jane's got the lead on preparing the Voice of the Patient report. You don't have to memorize Jane's email address. We will be sharing that. It's going to be on the FARA website. Specifically, there's a page on the website under the conference tab that is active and has information about the patient-focused drug development meeting. All of this information will be there, everything you need to know that we've communicated today, the recording from this webinar, the slides, all of that will be available through this conference link or through this web page. Also, before I go on the web page, there's also a registration button for the conference, and it's important for everyone who plans to attend the conference in person to register ahead of time, just so that we make sure we have the room set up appropriately for the right number of people. So we ask that folks do go to the web page and register if you're going to be able to participate in person. If you're going to participate online, you don't need to register in advance. But you will find at this web page, as we get closer to the actual meeting, all the information that you need to connect to the live webcast. Because we want as many people to participate as possible, we're going to be able to offer some travel support. We only have a limited amount of funds to be able to do this, but because we've got our partner organizations and we're reaching out for sponsorship from some companies, we've got some funds that we've been able to put aside specifically to help support patient families travel to the meeting. We're going to open up applications for travel support on April 15th. We wanted to do it after we've completed both of these webinars. Applications will be submitted through a Google form, and the link for the Google form will also be on that conference webpage on the FARA site. We will notify everyone about travel support decisions by April 30th. The max amount that can be requested is $750, and we did that again so that we could take the amount of funds that we have and try and spread them across as many folks as possible. We have negotiated a room rate at the Marriott of $139 a night, and so we're asking people to either use the Marriott, or if you're able to stay someplace else close by for less, that's great, but the max amount for hotel would be $139, and then the rest of the funds you can use, again, for airfare, train, and these funds will be awarded on first-come, first-served basis. So once that application opens the 15th, we really encourage you to apply as soon as possible. And we're going to we'll use all the funds we have on this sort of first-come, first-served basis. So just to summarize, this is really our opportunity, your opportunity to really make an impact on this drug development process and help the folks who are working on clinical trial design and drug development understand Friedreich's ataxia much better, understand what symptoms are important to patients, what meaningful treatments would look like for patients, and help make risk-benefit decisions, which is really critically important. I really can't stress that enough. This is a difficult job that the FDA has in terms of being able to weigh benefits versus risks of a drug. And without really understanding the disease context and the experience of people living with the disease, it's almost impossible. And so this is where we're able to communicate that information so that FDA is really in a much better position to make these risk-benefit decisions. And so really want to encourage everyone to participate and to stay tuned through the website for additional information about the meeting. And I think I can open it up to questions now. The first question I see, oh, Barbara, I see you. We're having trouble hearing. Hopefully you were able to figure that out. But Randy asks if the slide deck is available for sharing. Yes, the slides, this webinar has been recorded, and we'll make the slides in the webinar available on the website. There's another question that just came in. Does the FDA consider FA and the associated experimental treatments on a fast track for approval and for treatment for patients? So great question. Maybe I'll go back to a prior slide. Bear with me a second. So I mentioned briefly earlier when I was talking about the drug development process that there have been some changes that have been made, especially in the context of rare diseases, to sort of facilitate this drug development process. And Fast Track is sort of a program within FDA that companies can apply for that reduces the timeline of some of these reviews. And whether or not a specific therapy is eligible for Fast Track, well, they should be just based on the fact that FA is a rare disease, but it also is based on the drug company actually applying to the FDA for this Fast Track status for the experimental program. So one has to actually apply for it, but in most situations, there's no reason why a program wouldn't be eligible for Fast Track because FA is a rare disease. Let's see. So another question, can someone from another rare disease group attend the FDA meeting just to observe and learn? Absolutely. So folks from other rare disease groups are absolutely welcome to attend. I've actually watched several of the other meetings that have been done for other diseases in learning how to set this up. And then another question that just came in is, have we selected the panel participants? So so yes, we have selected the panel participants. There will be 10 total, 5 for panel 1, 5 for panel 2. But even if you have not been selected as a panel participant, it's really important to be there to offer your experiences and your thoughts related to the questions that we mentioned earlier during the open discussion. You know, the maximum amount of participation in the open discussion is really critical. Let's see, we've got a bunch of other questions here. I'll try and make sure I don't miss any. Will FARA be giving a research update at the meeting? So we won't be doing a research update during the patient-focused drug development meeting from 8 to 12:30, but after the meeting ends at 12:30, we've arranged for lunch to be provided for everyone who's there, and then after lunch, starting at 1:30, FARA is going to do a research update. And then the research update will also be available for folks who can't be there in person because it will be taped and recorded. So another question, do we expect a full room? I certainly hope so. Again, the more people who, what's important to FDA is that they don't just hear from those 10 people who were asked to participate on the panel, but they hear from as many people in the community as possible. And so being there in person to provide comments during the open discussion, participating online via the webcast, answering the polling questions is, you know, absolutely critical. The more people involved, the better. Let's see. There was a question of sort of a follow-up question to the fast track question I had about are there experimental therapies that have been given fast track? And yes, there are a few that in the past have been given fast track status. And so, you know, that would be eligible for a more rapid review once an NDA is submitted. We have had a few of those already successfully been awarded to drug development partners. Got all the questions. Give people another few minutes to submit any additional questions. It's great we have other rare disease advocacy groups participating on the call and willing to share their experiences. So we've also had folks from the Choroderma Research Foundation join us today. So thank you for participating, and I look forward to following. I'll follow up with you directly. All right. Well, since I don't see any new questions coming in, I hope that we've been able to provide information for everyone on how you can participate in the patient-focused drug development meeting, and hope that everyone will either be there in person or online. Again, if you have questions between now and then about any of the logistics, you want help thinking about some of the questions, thinking about what kind of testimony you want to make, really the entire FARA staff, MDA, NAP, all of our groups are available to you to help during that process. Please email us, call us. We're happy to help you think about how best to participate in the meeting. And looking forward to being with all of you on June 2nd. Thank you very much.